Today I'm going to talk about City of Sparkles AR, a virtual New York telling its own story. So basically, this is one of my side projects that I'm trying to render the real New York City in more like a stylized and artistic way. And at the meantime, use some real Twitter data to spawn in the city so that we're trying to use the Twitter data itself to talk about the story of the city itself and try to make players feel kind of emotional during the experience. The project is started as a virtual reality project. And today I'm going to talk about the initial idea and then talk about what happened when I migrated to AR and what I learned. So let me start from the idea and the design. So I grew up in a really big and crowded city. And oh, sorry, yeah. And during my grow up, like I was busy and I keep talking to people and join all the big parties, and there are always people around me. But I do sometimes feel lonely when I stay in such a big city. I feel lonely because mainly because when I walk on the street, there are thousands of people just walk by, and we don't know each other, we never talk to each other, and we never know their stories. However, I think a city is alive because all the residents' stories weaved together. And I feel isolated and lonely when I realize that I never know their story and that each one might have a really interesting and rich story during their life. So I'm trying to build something that kind of express such feeling of isolation and loneliness, and at the same time trying to explore some way that we can tell stories about people around us, but we never know. So it starts from a city, and it starts from a real life experience. So I'd rather start from using some real city to do this project. I picked up New York because it is a big and crowded enough city, and also I know many people are kind of familiar with it, and visually its skyline is really easy to recognize. So but we don't want to build yet another like Google Earth or something that just render exactly the same city as reality, and people just having virtual tour the same way as they're doing in the real world. And instead, I'm trying to make it more stylized and artistic. So I chose to build the New York City in a virtual way with particles. And as for story, as I mentioned, I want to tell some others' story, which I never know. So I won't bother make up story for them by myself. Instead, we are currently in an era of social network, and there are data flying around like all the days, and we have huge amount of data talking about daily life. So I'm trying to grab those Twitter data and then to see if I can kind of connect those with the city I'm presenting. So I use natural language processing to analyze the sentiment of those Twitter messages. Like some of them are happy, some of them are sad, and connect those sentiments with the visual and motion and music of the virtual city I'm presenting. And finally, those things working together can form a kind of a storyline that makes the audience feel some emotion that come up with the city itself. So this is the trailer of the virtual reality version. Okay, thanks for watching. So as you can see from the video, the VR experience is basically all about flying around the city and then looking for Twitter, which is presented as a red light, and you read the Twitter and like push forward the storyline. So basically, you can see in the trailer that there are 3 different things. The first thing, I call it lost. So it's talking about someone's kind of getting lost in the city and just come to the city and talking about the city itself, like it's really big, it's really crowded, something like that. And then the second stage, you can see the motion is much more dramatic, and the visual is not as nice as the previous one, but rather somehow more negative. And for this thing, if you look for the Twitters, they would be like more like about negative emotions, like I hate the city, or I'm too busy, or things like that. And then the third stage, I call it wish, is basically like have much more nice visual and nice motion and better music. It's talking about some more positive or complex emotions, such as I'm alone but I'm not lonely, things like that. And then all the 3 stages work together, so the player will start from kind of a neutral point, and then go to a low point, which is the negative part, and then go back to a higher point, which is the positive part. So such an emotion curve will like kind of deliver some kind of emotional feelings, abstract emotional feelings to the player about the kind of the familiar but different New York City. And this is some pictures when I do some exhibitions for the virtual reality part. So the motivation for me to start the migration work is basically 2 things. One thing is that AR devices have evolved a lot during these years. So basically, like I actually mentioned some ideas last year, also in ARinACTION, is that many years ago, I tried to do some AR work, and this is basically I saw a building that I find it's really ugly, and I feel it's really like just like a crazy monster. So I made a joke of this and built an app that when you point the app to a building, you actually see a kind of a monster inside the app, and you got to fight with the monster to defeat it. But this idea didn't go very well, because at those times, the only thing I can do is GPS, and everyone knows GPS is never accurate enough. And we didn't have anything like spatial mapping or like inside-out tracking. So it's really hard to make things happen. And I have to use a faked sky instead of a camera see-through in the app to kind of fake everything. But now, we have much more advanced devices, and we even have nice optical solutions for you to see through to the reality. And we have algorithms and software that help you to do the inside-out tracking and spatial mapping. So I would be really curious to see what if I revisit my ideas many years ago about like overlapping virtual things into a real world. And in addition, since I started the project, I started the City of Sparkle project based on a real city, and that does sound like a good idea maybe to connect the virtual city back to the real city somehow using augmented reality technology. So that's why I started this migration. But during the migration, there are a lot of design questions that need to be answered, because AR and VR are quite different. For example, these are some of the design questions, like presentation. How would I present this virtual world? In VR, I just put it there in a black background. And in AR, you got to somehow show something in the real world. And also for navigation, as you can see in the video, in VR, I'm flying around the city. But in AR, you cannot fly because I have to stand on the ground, then what could we do? Also for scale, like whether we should show a huge New York City or a small model, and also how do we do storytelling. So those are all the AR design questions I need to answer. And also there are challenges, and the biggest technical challenge is how to migrate the desktop graphics to a mobile device. But today I won't cover that part due to time limitation. So this is my first iteration. So basically I built a small New York City, that quite small, like this large, and put it on the table of my dining room, and showing some kind of motion. And also you got to do some manipulation, like to move the model around and scale, rotating, things like that. What I feel about this part is that it doesn't quite make sense. Like, I don't feel I'm part of the city, and I don't feel I'm feeling anything of this either. And the second iteration is room scale. Like, I basically put it on as big as my living room, and then I can just walk around and then like look for those red lights which represent tweets and read those tweets. This actually make me feel better because I realized that walking around is kind of a unique feature that only AR could do. Well, VR is also possible, but you got to deal with all the blocking issue and you don't want to run into a wall. But in AR, it's much more free to do that. But actually, the most interesting part come into this. Basically, just this last weekend, yesterday, I went to New York City and just standing behind the Brooklyn Bridge, wearing my Magic Leap, and then try to overlap what I rendered in Magic Leap to the real city. And this is a real footage shooted directly from Magic Leap without any post-processing. And by doing this, I now feel like this is the kind of a good way to present a real city with augmented reality, because like it's kind of a unique experience to see the city I'm familiar with, while with some kind of magical visual that overlapping it that I'm not familiar with and I'm curious about. And I also try to get on the Brooklyn Bridge and just walking while wearing the Magic Leap glasses, and there's overlap of the bridge, and while I'm walking, there are tweeters that randomly pop up that is based on the Brooklyn location. And most of the Twitter messages are actually literally talking about the Brooklyn Bridge while I was physically walking there. And that is a unique experience I find like really interesting, and I'd like to go further. I won't cover technical details here today, but if anyone's interested in like how to render like millions of particles on a mobile GPU and how to do GPU animation, feel free to ask me, and I'll showing demo over there for a while. Yeah, I think that's all. Thank you.